I mean, we were open to presenting as much true information in that piece as we could collect.
You know, events in the home, I mean, these are...
Do you think I should not report on a 911 call?
Yes, I think you should not report on it.
Oh, well, that's... I would disagree with that.
Because in the broad sweep of someone's life, that is one event, someone age 18, etc.
So I would have censored that?
Yes, because it would be distortive. It has a distortive effect on the broad sweep of someone's life because it is so emotive.
You know, I think you're not giving the audience enough credit, Julian. I think that a lot of people understand that when an 18-year-old comes to live with a father and a stepmother, that there are lots of tensions in that situation. I don't think any 18-year-old is really happy to be back home living with his father and his stepmother under those conditions. But to suppress that information and not trust the audience to be intelligent enough and experienced enough to understand what that is, I don't think it fully condemns them.
Yeah, but did you give the audience your whole take of everything you recorded?
Yeah, well, no, it's on we published the whole call online.
But in your edit, which is what people actually see.
Well, whenever we edit a film, we make certain choices.
Exactly. So you make choices.
But I don't think that we misrepresent. We didn't misrepresent the call.
You suppressed everything. You suppressed everything, quite intentionally, that didn't go into the edit. So it's about choice. And is the choice representative, or is it not representative? And
I think it's representative. But we could disagree.
How many other 911 calls were there?
What, from that home?
Yeah.
I don't know of any.
Okay, so it's not representative, is it? It's an isolated event, a highly emotive, isolated event involving the criminal law.
Well, but that could be said of releasing the Apache video, right? I mean there's always more context to an event. And I'm not implying that wasn't a service to present that, but there's always more context to an event. Anyway, are we going to argue about this?
Surely you're not equating that Apache video
to a
911.
No, I'm making the point about context, that's all. That there's always more context. One could argue...
You're saying a 911 call is context to the life of Bradley Manning.
Yeah, I think it was worth...
But don't you see how impactful and distortive that is?
What I'm really concerned, the concerns that we had were over if you're looking at this situation whereby we begin to share more information with among more people in a post 9/11 world. If there is validity to having to be careful about who's getting what information, then we need to be taking a look at those people that have access to that information. And there have been several stories talking about Bradley's trouble at Fort Drum and Bradley's trouble once he was in the operating base in Iraq. And I think that the 911 call adds to an understanding of the temperament and the mood, the temperament of Bradley and the mood in the sort of surroundings that he was in. I don't think it was worth suppressing that for any reason.
So
but we could agree to disagree on this.
Do you go into the backgrounds and the past and the little details of the childhood from the people that made those decisions to give that information to more people? Because maybe they have things that have biased and influenced their decision to make that choice. The people in the administration that have decided that more people should have more information.
You go into whether they had a 911 call when they were 18.
Did you look at all of their past as well? If the concept you're investigating is the fact that a decision was made by the government to give more people more information, and more people within the intelligence and the army more information, did you look at all the background of those people and what influenced their decision?
I can't say I looked at the background of all those people, of course not.
Or did you look at the background of the principal?
No, but I'm interested in understanding the handling of information in a post-9/11 world. And
exactly. So the people who made those decisions to introduce this system where information will be shared more, including information from the SIPDIS system in the State Department, did you look into their childhood to understand why they had the personality to make that decision?
Not at this point.
Because I would say that that's probably more interesting than some private that now has that information, if that's the thing that interests you, why they made that decision, and things that may have influenced their choices in doing so.
Come on. Okay.
And those are individuals.
Are we gonna sit down and talk?
Yeah. And those are individuals to which.
Are we gonna sit down and talk though? I just want to know.
Well, assuming this conversation goes right, those are individuals to which you have no duty of care. Those senior figures who are in positions of power. I say that Bradley Manning is a young man who, regardless of whether the allegations against him are true or not, is in solitary confinement, is facing a trial process, a highly politicised trial process, and potential, although unlikely, but potential execution.
I think that's on.
And potential.
Certainly
what
many
about
years away.
What about if Sarah Palin becomes president? So faces potential execution and likely life imprisonment, and that you have an intense duty of care to this individual, this powerless, victimized individual, to not put distortive emotional facts into a jury's mind.
I have an obligation not to distort the truth. True. But that's not what I was doing here. That's not what anybody was doing here.
Well, I'm sure you didn't have an intent to do that.
Right.
But I say that you have done that.
I understand.
And that you should understand and realise and accept that you have done that. And I know that's a hard thing to accept and it's a hard thing to hear. But nonetheless, I believe that is true, and that you should attempt to make recompense for the distortion to the political climate.
I am interested in doing a fuller piece that provides more context on this. I do think that there's serious questions about why Bradley Manning is the only person that is behind bars at this point. If indeed, I mean from the government's point of view, if indeed so much information was made available irresponsibly, speaking from the US government's point of view, then why is Bradley Manning the only person that's behind bars? Look, I think it's a great idea to have more context to that story, but I think that what we reported was true. You're saying it's distortive. There was an interview with the father that aired on PBS NewsHour. There was an interview with me on Morning Edition, and there was the piece that went out and that is currently online, along with fuller excerpts of interviews with his good friend and his father. So as a package, there's a lot of material there to digest. If you look at one piece of that, perhaps, I don't know how much you've seen, but...
I've seen some of the online material.
Yeah, and I think if you heard I don't know if you heard the interview that I did with NPR.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's there online. You can listen to it. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I don't not understand what you're saying.
I would suggest one more thing, that Bradley Manning is alleged to have been a source to what must be tens of thousands of news stories, some of them very important, and that we as journalists have an obligation to protect and defend sources, not just our own sources, but other people's sources as well. And if we do not do that, we are not able to protect and defend the public, because without fresh sources the public get nothing. So I say that you as a journalist have an ethical obligation that is encoded into your profession, that rises above normal considerations, and that you must, as a journalist, be very careful with Bradley Manning.
I think that's true of anybody that we're dealing with.
No, I think it is.
You're saying it's especially true with him, but I think the standard should be, applied all around. But I understand. You're saying that because he is a source that has provided so many stories, one should be extra careful with him. But one can be...
Because he's allegedly, and that's what he's in prison for supposedly doing.
But yeah.
So he is part of the profession you are involved in.
As are you.
Absolutely. And so that we have a professional obligation that is not just to our sources, but it is to the endeavour that we share.
I want to talk about your feelings about what's happened here, and about Bradley Manning, and about the Adrian Lamo chat, and about how all this has gone down. I'd like to begin. I'd like to talk about it.
Okay. You've heard what I've said.
I did very much hear what you said.
So, I'd like to...
You're concerned
I'd like
about
to
what
be,
we did.
to be stern with you.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Outside the interview, which I've done now.
Well, it's not outside the interview because you've tape recorded it, so it's public.
Well, we won't make it public unless there's some distortion about what happens.
Do I have your word on that? I mean, I didn't come here to be interviewed if I did.
Yeah.
But
there is no intent. We have no intent to do that. It's not.
All right, I'll take your word for that.
We filmed all CBS and 60 Minutes, and we haven't released that either because it was not distorted. But anyway, so I sort of given you my feelings about the journalistic framework that we're engaged in, which is something that is too particular to actually do in the interview. Also, I don't want my irritation about...
Well, you don't want to be on television scolding me.
Yeah. And neither do you, actually. So...
Well, apparently, that's the result. But so far, that's as far as we've gotten. Listen, I want to be very clear. I think I understand what you're saying. I know I understand what you're saying. And could that piece have been situated with more context? I would have preferred that there was more context around that piece, but I would not have shied away from reporting on what we had learned. It just goes against my instincts to and I don't want to get in an argument with you about all editorial choices or suppression, but I think that there's a place for that 911 call in an understanding of Bradley Manning that's truthful, but is also fair to him as a human being. I think that those who villainize Bradley Manning remove his humanity, but so too can some of those who lionize him and create him as a hero limit our understanding of him as a person. This is all about people. You, him, and some players in other places.
Okay. I just think that the prism of looking at him as a young man with knives who knocks his father to the floor, which comes across, apparently that's not what happened, but which comes across as him with a knife in his hand knocking his father to his floor, about to stab his stepmother. That prism is incredibly distorted. It is very memorable. I just repeated it back to you. I've seen that once. It spreads quickly. It will be seized on by his opponents and will be used to distort the political climate. And you really do have an obligation to understand how emotional events spread in a political climate.
Well, we will have a fuller portrait of Bradley Manning in the hour.
All right, so let's do this.
Would you do anything differently in releasing that video if you had to do it all over again?
always, when I look back in the past, I hope to want to do things differently. That is what happens to anyone who learns.
Not always.
Always.
Sometimes you nail it.
No, always. Always. You should always look back at the past and think, I would do something differently, because otherwise you haven't learnt.
But in this case, were you satisfied with the impact of the video? Did it achieve the result that you had hoped?
It was pretty close. I mean, it is hard to know precisely what a more successful impact would look like. So I can imagine some scenarios where that is a possibility, but those scenarios also have costs.
Some say that you felt that it taught you the lesson that you needed to work more closely with established organizations.
I'm sure established organisations say this, but actually we have been working with fellow journalists since 2007. I mean,
but you were not disappointed in the impact of it. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, that's what is being said out there.
No, I'm not. I'm not disappointed with the impact of it. Could we have structured things, structured various deals, economic incentives, and so on, to get an even bigger impact? The answer is probably yes. The answer, if we had done a deal with a US broadcaster to give them some kind of exclusive access to this, that US broadcaster probably would have then defended it.
They wouldn't have called it collateral murder. I mean, that's been the...
No, but I'm not concerned about that. I wanted to call it permission to engage because that was something that came, a phrase that came out of it, but that phrase was already used elsewhere. And as a as a sort of headline, many documentary titles are inflammatory. And actually, we did want to attract attention to the very specific event of this journalist crawling in the gutter and being deliberately targeted and killed, even though he was unarmed, and his rescuers. In common parlance, that is murder, and there is no doubt about it. We also released the rules of engagement in very detailed description, including flowcharts to show that even under the US military's internal procedure, that was not a justified attack. And all sorts of rhetoric occurred by a military apologist after the event, talking about, oh well, the rules of engagement perhaps allows this. But we produced the rules of engagement. Not one of those people read the rules of engagement and said, here, under this section, that this is not a murder. We did. I did. I am confident that that title is correct. Now, should we have chosen another title to discourage an attack based on the title, a misleading attack that would deflect from the content? Possibly, but having done many of these high-profile releases now, I know for certain that you have initiative for about 2 days. After 2 days, the group that you've exposed conducts a counterattack, and they look for whatever is a weakness or something that will gain parlance in the political debate, and they seize on it. And there is always one. And those energies will go towards some mechanism of defence for the organisation that has been exposed and embarrassed. And when you're dealing with a situation like we were dealing with the United States, where we have a very powerful grouping, which is not just the US military, rather it is a patronage system that concerns the US military and tens of thousands of military contractors and their families and the politicians that make their way and their power out of that system. It is inevitable that there is a very aggressive counterattack. And we saw that. But the way that this footage has gone on in the world is effective. So there are continual movies and documentaries. There are continual documentaries and investigative reports that use this footage. in many languages, in many nationalities. It is now part of the historical record. The political churn and debate over it is now gone. Now this piece of information, this footage, is part of history, and it is being used like part of history, like a quote from Madison.
Not long after the release of that video, you hear about this chat between Bradass87 and Adrian Lamo. What went through your mind?
I saw this in Wired magazine, and the claims were that this Bradass character was the source for the collateral murder video.
He's in it. He says he's the source. Whoever that is.
Well,
whoever that
this
is.
This is a computer record. We investigated very quickly who this Adrian Lamo character was, and this is a very disreputable character.
He was a contributor to WikiLeaks.
He was not right to call him a contributor to WikiLeaks. We looked up our records. According to those records, he donated $20 on one occasion, and then immediately went out and told his social grouping that he had done so. So it is mischievous to call this individual, to suggest the individual has anything to do with WikiLeaks. He seems to be someone who plays on the media, is even perhaps addicted to the media in a very self-destructive manner. He owes the federal government a large amount of money. I encourage everyone to simply look at an interview with him to see the sort of character involved. But this is an individual which has some computer skills, strange motivations, had been in a mental hospital 3 weeks beforehand, is addicted to the limelight, and has done many I would say almost self-harm in order to get media exposure. So the integrity of the electronic record, which can be fabricated very easily, that he submitted to a very long-term friend of his and former computer hacker at Wired magazine, Kevin Poulsen, we don't know about. But we investigated the context and the surroundings very quickly when it came out.
Do you believe that it's not a legitimate chat?
We know that there are certain sections that are not legitimate. For instance, the timestamps at one point in time are reversed in this conversation. We also know that Adrian Lamo has made statements that are contradictory to each other and what is inside the conversation. We know that there are some contradictions with what Kevin Poulsen, the editor at Wired magazine, says. For instance, Kevin Poulsen said that all material that didn't reveal national security matters or was purely personal issues was released. But we can see that Adrian Lamo has spoken about other parts that he alleged to be in this conversation that are neither personal nor matters of national security. They are to do concern things that he says are the framework of the conversation, how the conversation started, under what conditions, etc. And those are not there. So there is something odd with this conversation. We don't know whether it is mostly illegitimate or partly contaminated, but there are certainly elements of it that are incorrect.
So what do you suspect? You
Well,
think it's a frame? I mean, it's a frame-up?
We can look at the long history of the interaction between Adrian Lamo and Wired magazine. It goes back almost, with Kevin Poulsen, almost 10 years. He has been involved in these sorts of things, trying to get stories into the media about hacking-related activities.
What's his motivation, do you think?
Adrian Lamo.
Yeah. I mean, you're alleging that...
Adrian Lamo, I mean, his motive, as far as I can see, his general motivation is he's an attention seeker.
He says that you wrote him an email after the fact.
Yes, that's correct.
You did. And that you encouraged him to change his characterization of the events.
I encouraged him to, well, I don't have the email before me, perhaps you...
Well, this is just from an interview with him where he says, Assange sent me an email after Bradley was arrested encouraging me to change my characterization of the events, to refer to Manning as a whistleblower rather than a spy.
Yes, I thought that if there was a chance that, regardless, let me clarify. As spokesperson for WikiLeaks, we are in a very difficult position concerning Bradley Manning. The difficulty of our position is that our technology does not permit us to understand whether someone is one of our sources or not, because the best way to keep a secret is to never have it. We are dealing with intelligence agencies that are very sophisticated. So that instead of keeping source identities secret, we simply do not collect them at all, even in the first place. So we do not know whether Mr. Manning is our source or not, or whether he is some intermediary in this process, or whether he knew a source. We have no understanding of this. And of course, if we did know, we are obligated ethically to not reveal it. We are also in a position where we cannot say things which might be misconstrued as us suggesting that he is a source. But nonetheless, what we do know is we have a situation where there is a young man in solitary confinement who has been there for over 300 days now in very severe conditions. And the allegations against him are related to our publishing activities. Therefore, we do have some kind of moral obligation to look into his case. But we have to conduct how we talk about it very carefully.
Sure. People who've read the chat will raise those sections that this guy, Brad S87, I don't know if that's Manning or not. There's no way I can know at this point. Talks about developing a relationship with you. He talks about, he says things like, I don't know much more than what he tells me. I mean, and there's several of these instances where he talks about you and his relationship. And when you read it, it sounds like there's a connection, perhaps a chat or email or some kind of connection with you. When you read those, what did you think?
We looked at the whole context. Was this someone trying to big note themselves by suggesting a connection to us? We don't have sources that we know about. And I never heard the name Bradley Manning before. I never heard the name Brad S87 before.
And you never had a relationship with somebody who, you wouldn't have a relationship with somebody that was supplying source material.
We receive inquiries from people who say, how do I upload something? That is something that our sort of help desk deals with. People ask questions about what is secure, what is insecure, and things like this.
But how do you prevent me from writing you and telling you in a chat that I have a video of a massacre in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere, and I want you to tell me how to get it to you? I mean, now you've got a situation sort of placed out there where
our chat,
you know what.
Yeah, our help desk has a completely anonymous chat. It's anonymous to us. The usernames are anonymous, and so on.
Let's pause for 1 second.
Sorry, let's close that. Is there any
Was that going on? No, I don't think so.
That's going on in there.
I know. I wonder if there's another door at the end of the corridor. There's not. Yes, there is, and it's shut anyway.
I'm not trying to get you in trouble on that. I just have to ask these questions because they're out there.
I'm not really
It's,
going to
anybody who looks at that chat says, "What the hell is this?"
That noise we're not going to be able to control because it's gone.
And I understand your position where you can say only so much.
Okay.
Just,
I mean, if we could ask them if they wouldn't mind being a little quiet.
Yeah,
but,
she has.
obviously.
but it's
Yeah.
a
No, absolutely.
3-year-old.
Yeah, of course. Oh, right.
In
You
one
can't
room.
tell a 3-year-old
I
film.
know.
And there's about 10-15 minutes left.
15.
15.
I understood that initially you had hoped to publish in the order in which it was received the material that you were leaked. Is that wrong? I mean, I guess I want to get to this question of being overwhelmed by the amount.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have in your imagination that you were going to be inundated with a tsunami of materials as you have been?
Yes.
You did?
That was a view that would gradually happen, and we would need resources to scale up accordingly.
But you're a very small organization and with a very small infrastructure. How did you ever think that you were going to be able to handle the kind of volume of material that you got?
Well, through delegation, but it's something that needs to be built up. I mean, something we are building up. We're working with 63 or more media partners now.
Did it happen faster than you imagined it would happen?
The overall impact did not happen faster than we imagined, but the spikiness in receiving material is something that was a bit unexpected. So some weeks things are very flat, and other weeks we receive a lot of information, often coinciding with press activity. So whistleblowers hear about us, and they are enthused and encouraged by hearing about a successful case that we've dealt with, and so they step forward.
But 90,000, more than 90,000 Iraq war logs, 391 or 92,000. Did I say that?
Well, we have a lot more than this. I mean, it's
Right. So you have. I mean, you expected you would get that kind of volume of material.
yes. Eventually, that's why I said that I believe that the media alone, as an economic sector, is simply not large enough to process what we need to understand about the institutions that make up our society. It's just not big enough. We need the media, and we need people, the average man, to come forward and assess the material we're releasing.
Have you ever coached or helped a source figure out how to not deliver material to you, but to crack it, to get it out of the system that it's in?
Well, I'm going to speak in a different way on this question. There is something occurring now in the United States which is very dangerous. It is, if it's not dealt with, the end of national security journalism in the United States. The argument being proposed by the Pentagon, pushed in a 40-minute public press conference by spokesperson Jeff Morrell, is that any sort of traditional investigative journalism concerning classified information is espionage. If that interpretation is allowed to stand, there will be no more quality journalism in the United States holding the national security sector to account. A very, very dangerous thing. And Bill Keller of the New York Times has slotted in to that interpretation in order to protect the journalists of the New York Times and himself. Keller has said that the New York Times was not involved in any collaboration with us. That is simply false. There was collaboration from beginning to end in terms of timetabling, researching stories, talking about how to understand data, etc., etc. Embargo dates, the works. Keller has tried to say we were just the source, they were a passive recipient. And the reason that Keller did that, and we knew before it became public, was that they received legal advice that in order to protect themselves from the Espionage Act, they needed to be completely passive, or be presented as completely passive. One man's collaboration is another man's conspiracy. So any collaboration between a journalist and a source, between one media organisation and another media organisation, can be viewed, the Attorney General Justice Holder says, as a conspiracy that flows through. That's a very dangerous interpretation, and that interpretation must be resisted, and the New York Times must stand up and it must hold the line that this traditional form of journalism that people have been doing in the United States, Cy Hirsch and others, concerning the national security sector, calling up sources saying, well, what do you know about this helicopter accident? What do you know about this abuse allegations that we've been hearing, and can you prove it? That needs to be protected at all costs. Because if it is not protected, it will be the end of holding the national security sector to account. And the reality is that that sector makes up directly and indirectly some 30 to 40% of the entire US economy. It is extremely powerful, and at the moment that tax revenues in the United States have gone down, we see that that sector is increasing the amount of money it's getting, i.e. it is increasing its political power domestically to suck out more money from the US tax base and give it to its patronage network, which includes all the big military contractors, plus the military itself and the spy agencies and the politicians that get their power of pulling the whole thing together. Very dangerous business.
I hear you. But you're answering in that to a question, effectively deflecting from the question of whether you have, in practice, encouraged, coached, helped sources get material out of...
Well, I'm answering it this way for a very specific reason. To say yes would be to fall under what the Pentagon is trying to say is espionage, but is nonetheless legitimate journalistic activity. And to say no would be to not hold the line journalistically. To say no would be encourage and legitimize the argument that the only form of journalism that is not illegal is when journalists don't speak to sources. Actually, WikiLeaks as an organisation is one of the very rare media organisations that doesn't tend to speak to sources.
But you want to defend the right of all journalists.
But I want to defend the right of all journalists to do precisely that, and that if we need to do that one day as well, I want to defend that right as well.
And there's nothing in your view, just to be clear, in fact, it's necessary for you to be in a position where you can help a source get material out of the national security establishment and release it to the public.
Well, we see that individuals like Cy Hirsch and many other traditional investigative journalists in the United States, for some of their best stories, have done precisely that. They speak to sources embedded within the national security sector, and those sources give them proof of allegations in the form of documents. That's a very, very valuable thing, and it must be protected at all costs, and the right of journalists to do that must be protected.
You need to take those, Marty.
Okay. I have so many ways I can go here. Sorry for some. It's all very interesting. You're very good.
Ian,
Yeah.
can you pass me a battery if you have?
I want to get the balance right between questions that you might perceive as exploration of mistakes with these larger questions of what all this means and where we're going and all of that. So,
Carry on there.
is difficult because there's been so much criticism that I have to lay before you.
Well, no, you don't. I mean,
Well, I do have to have
A
your
bit, a
response.
bit.
I have to
No,
have your response.
absolutely don't. Absolutely don't.
I don't.
No, you don't.
Isn't that my
No,
responsibility
you're
to give you a chance to
no,
answer those people?
Absolutely not. We have a situation here where different people have perceptions about what is happening and what is important.
We don't want
They're-
them to set the full sole agenda. I
Why
agree.
should they be setting the agenda? Why should they be setting the frame?
Because somebody said, well, you didn't ask Julian about that. I have no idea what he thinks about that. I mean, yes, it's a tricky situation.
That's a very large and very powerful and, quite frankly, very dangerous group. The national security sector as an economic patronage sector. And it, combined with two media competitors, Guardian, New York Times, the others are fine, it combined with those two media competitors and a few opportunists have made all sorts of criticisms and encouraged the spreading of criticisms. But that is their frame. That is something that they believe is helpful to their agenda.
I'm sorry to do this. I have to move quickly. We did record that. Was there internal discussion about further release after the Collateral Murder film was made and then Manning's arrest takes place? Did you discuss internally amongst yourselves whether or not releasing the war logs and eventually the cables could further jeopardize him?
There was discussion about, we have a situation where there is a young man held in a military prison under investigation who's alleged to be a source for Collateral Murder video. But we have published and received military documents long before Bradley Manning ever joined the army. We have received military documents long after Bradley Manning was arrested. So we are in a difficult position where we do not know precisely what it is Bradley Manning is alleged to have given to us.
But he did say, he mentioned some of these packages in,
Well,
allegedly,
for
in the chat.
example, in that alleged chat, he does not mention anything about the Afghan material.
But the Iraq war logs and the
whatsoever.
cables are mentioned.
So
And the Gitmo papers that are about to be released.
he mentions a number of things, or is alleged to have mentioned a number of things. And we don't know whether he is an intermediary source. We have no idea precisely how he is alleged to have been involved, how he is or is not involved in this conduit of getting information to us. But what we do know is that we promised the source that we would publish everything that they gave to us. That's what we publish, that's what we promise all our sources. If we receive the information, it is done under that promise. We cannot be in a position whereby people can take hostages and prevent publication. We cannot be in a position where we negotiate with hostage takers, because to do that would not only be to violate a promise that we make to the people who give us information, it would be to set up a structure whereby publication could be stopped by taking hostages and claiming that these hostages, true or false, are our sources.
The question of harm minimization came in for a lot of criticism of that. That you were, in your initial conversations, not concerned.
It was absolutely false. And this is a typical rhetorical trick.
Why does this keep coming up? Why are there
I'll
people out there that are saying
I'll
that you didn't care if informants were killed?
It's absolutely false. And I'll explain to you the two reasons. I'll explain to you why it keeps coming up. First of all, this is this bog standard tactic of the Pentagon. Whenever they are or expect to be criticised for slaying innocent civilians, thousands in the case of the Afghan war diaries, people killed, documented in this conflict, over 20,000 by our material. Whenever they come under that criticism, they use the bog standard rhetorical trick, which is to turn the precise criticism that you expect back on your opponent. So the criticism that they were expecting is they were involved in a situation that has led to the deaths, the documented deaths of over 20,000 people. So what do they say? They say, we might have blood on our hands. When their own records document that broader military conflict killing 20,000 people. 20,000 people! Now, if we go to the detail about names, it is right to name names. It is absolutely right to name names. It is not necessarily right to name every name. We are dealing with a situation where we have in Kabul radio stations who are meant to be independent, who are funded by USAID, taking PSYOPs programming content, psychological operations programming content, to be played on their radio stations as news. But it is actually propaganda. Now, the names of those people involved, do the Afghan people have a right to understand which one of their media channels are propaganda and which ones are truly independent?
I'm confused.
Of course they do.
I'm confused. You're saying that you had the right to name names of those people who were informing the U.S. military.
There's many names that, first of all, we didn't release 1 in 5 of the documents.
Right, you held them back.
We held it back.
Those were the threat reports.
1 in 5, because the assessment by the media partners that we were working with is that those documents contained names of informers who were innocent.
But you reject the idea or the allegation
completely
that you ever resisted, that you were into just releasing the names.
It's completely false. We, as all good investigative journalists do, name names. We name names of those people that are involved in corrupt or abusive activities, and that includes in Afghanistan. And then there are people that are incidental characters, but are not themselves threatened in any way.
Mm-hmm.
They should also be named as part of just the context to a situation. We have a harm minimization procedure. A harm minimization procedure is that we don't want innocent people who have a decent chance of being hurt to be hurt. Now, no one has been hurt. There is no allegation by the Pentagon or any other official source that anyone has been physically harmed as a result of our publication of the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war diaries, or the State Department records, or Karamoto video, or in fact anything we have done over the past 4 years and over 120 countries. Now, we are dealing with very significant and substantial information. There may come a time where, in order to save people from war, to save people from corruption, to assist in taking a dictatorship to a democracy, that people incidentally come to harm. That is never our intention. That day may yet come. But that day has not come yet. And that is, in fact, a proud record for this organisation.
Okay, let me jump to the next thing, which is that the cables, according to U.S. diplomats, has made it harder for them to do their job. Was that the intent?
Well, if they are embarrassed by what their job is, then yes, it was absolutely the broader philosophical intent to make embarrassing behaviour harder to commit.
But it will
because
make
embarrassing behaviour,
local officials less likely to share information.
Embarrassing behaviour is just this side of abusive behaviour.
Right.
And we want to generate a situation not only where people have the knowledge to conduct their affairs, the knowledge to understand their the powers in their society, but whereby there are disincentives.
But the embarrassed parties, for the most part, are foreign leaders, foreign officials who now are reluctant to share information to talk to US officials?
If the cost of stimulating revolutions like we've seen in Tunisia, in Cairo, and a whole swathe of political reforms that have been sweeping down through southern America, if the cost for that is that for a little while some foreign leaders are going to be a bit more cautious when speaking to the State Department, then that is clearly a cost that balances in favour of what people need.
Okay. Who are you accountable to?
We're accountable to the public, and we are much more accountable to the public than most democratically elected governments. In fact, than any we are more. Start again.
Who are you accountable to, Julian?
We are accountable to the public, and let me explain how we're accountable to the public. All the fruits of our labour are published. We are a publishing organisation. There is nothing that we do that does not result in material that is being published. So the public can see what it is we do. We don't do anything that doesn't result in publishing. The public chooses to support us by defending us politically, by giving us money, and by giving us source material. And the media chooses to work with us or not, depending on whether they think we're doing a good job. And all our job is published. We survive on week to week and month to month basis purely as a result of public donations, purely as a result of intellectual donations, information provided by our sources. If the public believes within a 3-month period that we should not be supported, that is the end of WikiLeaks. And that is unlike any democratically elected government. We are perhaps not the most, but one of the most accountable organisations to the public because we draw all our support from the public. We are not an organisation that draws our support from advertisers. We are not an organisation that draws our support from the USAID or from the Russian government. We are not an organisation that draws its support from controlling oil in the ground. We're an organisation that draws our support from the public. As soon as the public stops supporting us, there is no more WikiLeaks.
And what's next?
No, sorry. I have to put him on a phone call. It's been over an hour.
I came a long way.
Can't do a what's next.
Will you make a stop after this question? I'll go to get the phone call waiting. Can I nip in front of you?
Yeah, carry on.
We're going to discuss what was next. Yeah, just quickly.
What's next for WikiLeaks?
We are now in a position where
Let's
we...
start that again. What's next for you?
For me or for you?
What's next for WikiLeaks?
WikiLeaks is continuing to step up its publishing speed, the number of organisations we're involved in, the number of countries we're involved in. We have a number of significant upcoming projects. We have an increased coalition of media partners. We're still involved in getting the majority of these cables out to all the countries where they can make a difference. And you can see just recently we've done that in India, we've done that in Paraguay, where this information about how senior people in these countries operate, their corruption, their relationships with each other, is really generating significant and important reform. And I guess in a way we have the State Department to thank for collecting that information and the US taxpayers for subsidising the collection of that information. You know, it should have been the case that our release of that material made no difference whatsoever. If we had investigative journalists funded to the same degree that the State Department was funded, that information would have been picked up by those journalists. It isn't. And so we have to rely on the subsidies that powerful organisations, intelligence agencies and diplomatic establishments give to describe the world, and then we are able to give that description to the people, and it does good. We can see the effects all around us.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Welcome.
I wish we didn't start on such a bad note.